Today, we're going to talk about international signings. We're going to talk about Jackson Jobe a little bit, but mostly we're going to talk about the offseason as a whole, the biggest moves, teams that were the loudest, teams that were the quietest, and of course, where the Tigers fit into all of that. All today on Locked On Tigers.
You are Locked On Tigers, your daily Detroit Tigers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Locked On Tigers. I'm, of course, your host, Scott Bentley. Today is Wednesday, January 17th, 2024. Thank you so much for making Locked On Tigers your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com/locked-on for you to get started. Okay, welcome back. Hope everyone's having a fantastic week so far. Happy Wednesday to all. So we're going to spend this episode talking about international signing period that opened up on Monday, where the Tigers are doing within it, kind of where they stand, and then also their strategy, long-term implications, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to talk about Jackson Jobe a little bit, some prospect rankings. Really like Jackson Jobe, but we're going to spend most of the offseason, most of the episode talking about the offseason and kind of recapping the biggest moves, kind of the loudest teams, winners, losers, surprise teams under the radar, and then, of course, where the Tigers stand within the offseason as well. So, welcome back. Let's get started. International signing period opened up on Monday, the 15th. And the Tigers made a couple, well, they made a lot of signings, but they made a couple of noteworthy ones. International signing period, it's important to remember a lot of things. Okay, I'll give you these names, the two biggest names we got, and then we'll kind of go down and do the rundown of international signing period. So the two biggest names, looks like the biggest one is Nestor Miranda, who is the highest ranked player that the Tigers signed this offseason in international signing period. He was the 25th ranked on Baseball America's list and the 45th ranked on MLB Pipeline's list. A lot of variance there just because, again, these kids are so young, but we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. He received a $1.5 million signing bonus from the Tigers, according to Evan Petzold of the Freep. And then the other one was Venezuelan outfielder Jesus Pinto, who was the number 41 ranked prospect on Baseball America's list and was not ranked in Pipeline's. He turns 17 at the end of March. So he's 16 years old and received a $900,000 signing bonus, again, according to Evan Petzold of the Freep. So I have a lot of people asking me questions about, are these kids any good? Like their profiles and, just the Tigers' strategy and international signings in general. Like, is this a big deal? Whatnot. Not trying to damper anything. These are so far away, right? Like so far away. And I'm always excited about new talent. I'm glad that the Tigers are trying to be bigger players within the international free agent market, because for my entire life, they haven't been. Al Avila tried to. I'm not really sure if we're seeing the fruits of that labor, unfortunately, right? Like Roberto Campos has been kind of disappointing, I think is safe to say so far. Christian Santana has a really rough year under his belt over the last within the last couple of seasons as well. And those are the two biggest international signings in the history of the organization. So, it's a long ways away. Like that's really the thing you have to remember. It is a long ways away. These kids are 16, 17 years old, all of them. You're talking about guys who, a lot of the people that get signed this week won't even be in the minor league system next year, right? They'll almost all be in like the complex and working their, trying to work on their game and whatnot. And then, for some of them, even 2 years away from being in like the actual minor league system. And then you have to go through the entire minor league system, right? Like you're potentially talking about like 4 to 6 years before these guys are really like knocking on the door of the majors. And if you find a diamond in the rough and you find somebody who isn't like a super highly ranked prospect, but does really well for you and flies through the system at like 18 or 19 years old, well, then you're still like 3 years away from even that happening today. So it's not me trying to like put a damper or be like, no, like none of these kids are good. They might be good. It's just like you don't even know their profile yet, right? Like you don't know anything. Like and I'm not trying to discredit like the scouts obviously know way more than my dumb fill in the blank knows, right? Like certainly they know much more than I know about them, and that's why they're targeting them and wanted to sign them and whatnot. But it's so far away from being on the radar. Like you have guys that are going to be playing shortstop now at 16, and then as they literally grow into their bodies, will move to like right field or first base. Like you just it's so far away, and you don't even really know profiles yet. But there is this is a pretty talented international class by most accounts. The Tigers getting 2 ranked people in the top 50 by most lists. We'll take it. That's great. We'll keep an eye on them, obviously, as they develop. It's just we're years and years down the road from them really being on like any sort of radar for like long-term pieces within the Tigers organization. The only other thing I have to say about that is I have people that are like, oh, like this is disappointing. We didn't even get a top 20 prospect in the ranking. And Scott Harris has been talking about, being a much bigger player within the international market and whatnot. This probably isn't music to a lot of people's ears either. But this is another thing you have to wait on. Like so many of these kids, are kind of have an idea or already talking to teams at like 14 years old, man. Like it's, you know what I mean? Like it's not like the January 15th, the first day of international signing opened, and it's not like it's a secret as to why like 80% of all the people that are eligible to sign within the first 48 hours, because they already know who they're going to sign with months, if not years, before that day comes. So that's another thing that like Harris is trying to be a bigger player in an international signing market and is trying to be get the Tigers more. I mean, if you look around at the best players in the league right now, it's not just drafted players. Like, depending on where your cutoff is, even a majority of like the best players in the league are international like signings at one point, and we're not drafted, right? Like that you need to be relevant there and prevalent there to be a good baseball team. Like you need to. So I'm glad that it's been addressed. It's just not something that we are going to see the results in this early on in the Scott Harris tenure, which is like a huge waiting game. And I understand the frustration behind that, but that's not on Scott Harris. That's just how the system works. So hopefully next year, maybe we see, them getting higher and higher ranked players, but maybe not even next year. Maybe that's a year after next thing. And then again, you're talking about waiting 6 years or 8 years before those guys that are through the system and whatnot. It's a very, very long waiting game for most of these guys outside of like the 3 to 5 powerhouse can't miss guys at the top of the rankings every year. And even those guys are, 2 years from being 18, 2 to 4 years to get through the minor league system. So we will see what happens. I'm not upset by what they did today. We'll keep an eye on these prospects and see how they develop. Tigers had a lot of money to be able to spend, so it looks like they're gonna. I mean, my phone's been blowing up all day. They are signing a large number of players. It's going to take a while before we have an idea of like how legitimate any of these guys really are, even the best ones. Okay. All right, let's keep the ball rolling. Let's talk about Jackson Jobe for a little bit, and then we'll talk about the offseason as a whole. All right, we'll do all of that right after I tell y'all about a couple of our friends. First up, we got to talk about our friends over at FanDuel. The NFL regular season has wrapped up. It's the thick of the postseason, and the Detroit Lions are in the second round of the NFL playoffs. That's crazy. What a time to be alive. Truly, So there's no better time to get in on the action than with America's #1 sportsbook, and that is FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is so easy to use. There's so many different ways to bet, like live same game parlays, bets in the new Explore tab. Make a parlay at Parlay Hub, which is the best way to find new parlays, and so many more. So visit fanduel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Also, got to tell y'all about our new friends over at Ibotta. The New Year's for so many people means New Year's resolutions, and that is to save money for a lot of us. So stop shopping without getting anything in return and start getting cash back on every purchase you make with Ibotta. Ibotta is a free app that gives you the most cash back every time you shop on hundreds of items, from groceries to beauty supplies to toys, etc., etc. You can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what item you're purchasing. So join over 50 million savers and earn cash back on every item you shop for over 2,700 brands and retailers, including Lowe's, Macy's, Sephora, Best Buy, and so much more. Right now, Ibotta is offering listeners $5 just for trying Ibotta by using the code LOCKEDONMLB when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app to start earning cash back, and use code LOCKEDONMLB. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store, and use code LOCKEDONMLB. All right, everybody, welcome back here. Segment 2 of Locked On Tigers. Appreciate y'all for tuning in, making us your first listen every day. Shout out to the everydayers that do tune in every day. We will be back on Friday, as always. Also, be sure to check out Locked On Sports Today, the free 24/7 sports streaming channel on YouTube, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All righty. Well, so we've been talking about international signing. I want to talk about some players that are a lot closer to the major league level. And one of that is being Jackson Jobe. Now, as these prospect rankings roll out, we'll have an entire episode dedicated to just looking at the new prospect rankings and where the Tigers stand within them. And I always tell people whenever we do a prospect rankings episode, one of the points I really drive home is that this is a subjective industry with a lot of really, really smart people. Okay, so it's subjective in the highest regard, though, but it is subjective. That's why there are a million different prospect lists, and that's why, like, no Major League Baseball team, when they make a trade, is like, oh well, so and so's list had this prospect as the 6th ranked prospect, and I wanted a top 5 prospect in this trade, so this is objectively a failure. Not how it works. They have their own scouts that get paid hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, and they have their own reports and their own subjective opinions on all these players. Okay, so you really have to form your own opinion on these, but rankings are still a really nice tool to use. I respect all the people that make these lists a boatload, and it's always nice to have everything in one concrete list where we can kind of jump around and give our own opinion on all these. So the big one lately has been people are starting to roll out their starting pitcher rankings, and MLB Pipeline, which is one that I use a lot on this show because it's free. Not all the other ones are free. You need a subscription and stuff. So I like to talk about Pipeline as much as possible, just because of for accessibility for all of you wonderful people listening. They released their right-handed pitching prospect list. Number 1 was Paul Skeens. Number 2 was Jackson Jobe. He was the 2nd highest ranked right-handed starter in all of baseball. And even when eventually they will obviously just do their overall top 100 and they'll just do starting pitchers as a whole and not break it up righty-lefty, there are lists that are already starting to come out where Jackson Jobe just is straight up the 2nd best starting pitching prospect in baseball, regardless of righty-lefty. And Skeens is going to be number 1, and that's not a surprise to really anybody. just given the hype and what he did in college and his profile and everything, right? He's an incredible talent. But Jackson Jobe really turned a lot of heads last year. And I think that he is kind of the darling of this winter when it comes to prospect rankings. He made huge strides. He was not walking anybody. He was pounding the strike zone. The addition of the splitter, I think, can only lead to, or the cutter rather, I think can only lead to good things. Goodness. He had a phenomenal year. Velocity was great. The slider was as advertised. The spin rate's awesome. The command was stellar. The stuff continues to look better and better. He looked better post-injury than he ever did pre-injury. He looks remarkable. And for a guy that on draft night, a majority of the fan base, I would even say a large majority of the fan base, was talking about how like dumb of a pick it was and Marcelo Meyer and et cetera, et cetera. He has really just put that in the review mirror and just been an absolute horse. He has been an absolute dog on the mound, and I think a lot of people are excited about him, so much so that I think it is really possible that Jackson Jobe plays Major League Baseball in 2024. Do I think he's going to make the opening day roster? There is a 0% chance. But halfway through the season, maybe he's tearing it up in Toledo. Maybe you have a couple of bullpen injuries. Maybe you have a couple of starting pitching injuries. I think it is really possible. I don't know if I'd call it likely, but it is on the table. And I feel pretty confident about that, which means that next year, the year after this upcoming year, 2025, I think is probably going to be Jackson Jobe's season, like fully start to finish. And that's super exciting. Obviously, we have to see what he does this year. And prospect lists change all the time. But a lot of people are really excited about this dude. And I am too. And you should be too. Okay? So just want to throw that out there. Let's talk about the offseason. So spend a little more time talking about international signings in Jobe than I thought I was going to, but just looking around the league and talking about the international, we've already talked a ton about the international signings, and talking about the league's off season, right? And just talking about the free agent market and winners and losers. I mean, if we want to just start with a layup, right? The Dodgers, pretty clearly the biggest winners of the offseason. And I know everybody hates the Dodgers because of that. I'm not going to stand in the way of that take, right? I'm probably gonna be rooting against the Dodgers this upcoming season. Love Shohei Ohtani. Pretty pumped to watch Yamamoto pitch, etc. But I think anytime it's the same thing that the Yankees went through in the 90s and early 2000s. Anytime you get every single big name free agent, you're just naturally going to get booed by like everyone. So, yeah, man, they are pretty clearly the biggest winners of the offseason. I don't think that that's too much of a secret, but there's some other teams that I really liked, and I don't want to just end up going through every single team and going like, what did I think of this team? But I have a feeling that I might start to sound like that at some point. So I apologize if I do. But they're one of the other teams that I think not necessarily a winner, actually probably closer to a loser of the offseason than a winner, but still also had a decent offseason at the end of the year was the Giants. Had such a weird offseason. They're like the definition of always the bridesmaid, never the bride, right? Like they were in on every single free agent, it seemed like all of them. And yet, when it was all said and done, almost all of them dropped out at the end and were like, no, we're not going to go to San Francisco. And that's something that started a couple of years ago and has kind of trickled over now. They obviously acquire Robbie Ray. They get Tom Murphy, which I think is a good, cheap addition behind the plate. Hu Lee as well. Jung Hu Lee, fantastic pickup. Huge fan of his. big OBP guy. Pumped to watch him play center field for the Giants. And then, like, just the Jordan Hicks thing makes no sense to me. No sense to me. They have a guy who throws like 102 that they can use to set up one of the best closers in baseball that's already on the Giants. And instead, they're going to try to make him a starter. The only reason that this would make sense to me, okay, the only reason is if they also went out and got Blake Snell. That's the only way this makes sense to me, because then you have a little bit of a security like backdrop, right? Like, okay, we tried this thing. It was worth taking a chance on. Worst case scenario, we just have a really good reliever if he can figure out his mechanical and his command issues that he had in at times. Obviously, figured out a little bit there in his last year in St. Louis, but I feel like this is something that if you're actually planning on it and you don't have a fallback, I don't get it at all. It makes sense to me if they still sign another big name starter. If they don't, I think it has the potential to be really, really dumb. So we'll see what happens with that, but just a really odd last couple of winters for the Giants. And I think in a division with the Diamondbacks and obviously the Dodgers, they have just been outside of the one, was that 2021 where they won like over 100 games? Outside of that 1 year, they've kind of just been like around 500 for a while. Or was that last year? Regardless, I think that their core has been, is pretty much gone now. They were aging for a while there and now are starting to disperse around the league or retire. Just a weird team that's in a weird position. And they have one of the best front offices in baseball, very highly regarded, multiple highly regarded front office members. I'm just very interested in how their next 12 months are going to look. Because if this doesn't work and they're not very good again, again, if they're over 500, I think they're probably just going to stick with it. But if they finish with like 78 wins or something, even if they finish 500, like, what do you do then? I don't know. Giants are in a weird place. Let's keep talking. There's a lot of other teams. Obviously, we got to talk Yankees, etc. We will do all of that right after I tell you all about our friends over at Jace Medical. I know we talk about sports and we kind of use it as an escape, but we're going to take a second and talk about Jace Medical and about the flu season that we are in the middle of. Obviously, it's incredibly cold if you live in the Metro Detroit area, and there's a lot of kind of bugs going around as well. And you can be prepared for anything that comes your way with Jace Medical. The Jace case is something that Jace Medical offers, and it is a pack of 5 different antibiotics that treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, respiratory infections, sinuses, skin infections, amongst others. This stuff could happen to any of us. Visit jacemedical.com and complete your physician encounter, which will be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It's never been more important to be prepared than today. So go to jacemedical.com and use offer code LOCKEDON to get $20 off of your order. All right, everybody, welcome back here. Third and final segment, Locked On Tigers. Appreciate y'all for tuning in. So we've talked about some of the West Coast teams, talked about the Dodgers, obviously, and the Giants. The Yankees, obviously, one of the biggest storylines of the season, acquiring Juan Soto. I think it's a great acquisition for the Yankees. I think that he's going to do really well there. I think that Juan Soto is one of the bright young stars in this beautiful game. And I think that he also, people always talk like lefty at Yankee Stadium. Like, the thing that makes Juan Soto so good is that even if the huge power uptick doesn't happen, which I'm not saying it won't, it very well might, but even if it doesn't, his floor is so high because at a bare minimum, you're going to get a dude that walks a ton. And that's a nice high floor type of player. But Juan Soto is one of the elite hitters in this game, still so young as well. Really just the entire model of the Yankees going out there and trying to acquire left-handed hitters. They were really, really bad. Their lefties were really, really bad last year. So getting not only Juan Soto, but also Verdugo from the Red Sox, I think is something that can help them with their kind of quote unquote platoon situation as well. Marcus Stroman, we'll see how that works out. Obviously, not even somewhat, pretty controversial player wherever he signs. But I think that they needed more stability in the rotation. And I think that at a bare minimum, they got some of that. So I think he wanted a longer deal than just a 2-year deal, but we'll see what happens. The Yankees just have been were such a train wreck last year. And I think a lot of it is just getting a lineup around Aaron Judge. And Juan Soto is certainly a great step to doing that. One of the biggest things that jumps out when looking at kind of the every team's offseason is that, and we've talked about this before, so we don't have to spend too much time on it, is that the American League Central was unbelievably quiet. The Tigers were maybe the most active team. The only team that's really close to being as active or was as active was the Kansas City Royals. The Royals brought in Michael Wacha, Hunter Renfroe, Seth Lugo, Will Smith. Right, they went in and brought in quite a lot of pitching, and then obviously, like I said, Renfroe will certainly help as well. But like the Guardians did pretty much nothing. Right, new manager, that's kind of it. The White Sox did literally nothing. They did not bring in a major league player. I don't think, off the top of my head. I think that's right. They have done next to nothing at a minimum. The Twins, I think, have made only 1 or 2 major league signings. They're not very prominent. Like this is a division where you are in a position, and I've said this before, we don't have to go down this rabbit hole completely again, but there are not a lot of teams that are pedal to the metal trying to guarantee themselves a playoff spot. The Twins think they can just roll out of bed and just have the division again. The Guardians are just assuming, well, next year can't be as bad as 2023 offensively. We'll rebound a little bit naturally. Water will find its level. The Royals, I don't actually believe that they're contenders, but they're trying to not be like the worst team in all of baseball. Like this takes them from like 110 losses to like 98 or 100, right? Like it'll help them not be as bad, but they're not going to be contending for the Central. And then the White Sox are actively trying to be as bad as possible, I think. So and good for the Tigers. Again, we'll end with the Tigers here, but like good for them for at least making moves and trying to be. I know some people would have liked bigger splashes or more noteworthy ones or more expensive ones. And that's all fair. I'm not saying you're wrong to feel that way, but at least they didn't sit on their hands and do nothing like nearly everybody else in this division that is in a position to win the division. The NL Central, pretty quiet as well. The Brewers, I know, did not do too terribly much. They're kind of just, I think the Brewers within the next year might be in a rebuild. I think they might I think we're already starting to see it, obviously, with putting some of their better pitchers on the trade market. But it wouldn't shock me if the Brewers a year from now we're kind of blowing it up and starting over. So we'll see what happens there. Man, even the Dodgers, even outside of those two, right? Like getting Teoscar Hernandez, a couple of the trades they made, just heck of an offseason. Who else? Obviously, let me know teams that you think had a great offseason. I'd love to read kind of the general public's opinion of that as well. The Phillies, relatively quiet for being a Dave Dombrowski team, but they did spend a lot of money bringing back Aaron Nola, which is a good get. The Padres trading away Juan Soto, probably not going to be looked at as an awesome offseason, but they did make some. They were pretty big players in the just international market. Signed Suk Go, obviously from the LG Twins, the KBO team that I rooted for during COVID. And yeah, so like they are trying to keep their heads above water. I don't really know what the Padres are going to be next year. We'll talk about that when we get closer to like season predictions and whatnot and standings. The Cardinals, that's another team I wanted to talk about. Yeah, I thought the Cardinals really had a solid offseason. I think they addressed everything they needed to. This was a team that, like, worst case scenario was 2023. Everything that could have gone wrong did. And they had next to no pitching. So they went out there and addressed pitching in a big way. They got Sonny Gray. They get Kyle Gibson. They signed Lance Lynn again, right? He returns to the Cardinals. And I don't think Kyle Gibson and Lance Lynn are world beaters, but I think Sonny Gray is pretty darn good. And I think that Gibson and Lynn can at least give you innings along with what was already kind of in place there. They do have some young pitchers that are coming up as well. So I'm not worried about the Cardinals offense really whatsoever. If everybody's healthy, love Brennan Donovan. Goldschmidt and Arenado are going to be Goldschmidt and Arenado. They have a really good outfield. I love Jordan Walker. He's one of my favorite prospects in baseball. They really just need to shore up the rotation. I don't like that they didn't add any relievers, but I think that this year will obviously be much better for the Cardinals than last year. The Blue Jays, another team that was kind of in on all the big name guys that didn't walk away with any of them. They walk away this offseason with IKF and Kevin Kiermaier. Sure. Not bad, I guess, right? Sure, the Rangers, and then we'll end here probably on the Rain. Maybe we'll talk about the Mets for a second. I don't know. But the Rangers were a team that I thought had a pretty disappointing offseason. I'm sure any Rangers fan listening to that is like, la, 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 I don't care at all. We won the World Series. That's how I would be if, when the Tigers win the World Series. That's how I'm going to act too. I'm not saying you're wrong to feel that way, but I don't know. Like they only lost things, right? They didn't really add anything. They only lost pitching. And so with them losing pitching, I think that they could have done a lot more to like set themselves up for next year. 2023 was like an everything could have possibly gone right for the Rangers did. They had an unbelievable batting average with runners in scoring position that I don't think is sustainable, to be honest, like long term. I didn't even think it was sustainable throughout all of one season. So, if they continue to prove me wrong, bless them. Like I have no ill will toward the Rangers. I'm not trying to sound like a hater. But I feel like they should have done a lot more this offseason. I think it's relatively disappointing to just look around and kind of just be like, oh, yeah, well, everything that went so right for us last year will just go that right again. DeGrom's going to miss a lot of the year. They lost other starting pitching. Scherzer is a question mark. Like there's a lot of question marks surrounding that rotation in 2024. So we'll see what happens with them. But I thought that they kind of had a disappointing offseason after such a good and exciting momentum building regular season, but they still have their big name players. And at the end of the day, that was that and all their youth that showed out and balled out is kind of what made them as good as they were. Who else did I say? Oh, the Mets. Yeah, the Mets were fine. Whatever. I just get the Mets are so easy to talk about because everybody asks about them all the time. Like, oh, well, the Mets. Everybody loves to compare everything to the Mets because they have so much money and they always spend it and whatever. Yeah, I think the Mets are in trouble. Not that they're going to be like the worst team in baseball. I think they'll probably be better than they were last year. At least I'm hoping. Well, they should be hoping. I'm hoping, given how much talent is still on that roster, that they're better than they were last year. But yeah, man, I don't know. They didn't make any substantial changes. They didn't really do a whole lot of big moves for a team that had a season go as poorly as it did last year. So we'll see. Where the Tigers stand into it, and then I'll let you go about your day, is you know what? Kind of really not too much else to add from what I said earlier. They made moves. They actively tried to get better. They were one of the more active teams in their own division, if not the most active team in their own division. Is there still some penny pitching going on? Could you be upset that they didn't go out and make a bigger splash? Sure. I'm not going to stand in the way of that at all. I want to see a bigger, big splash, kind of big name move, take a risk move as well, a headliner type of deal as well. But for this I don't think this offseason is a failure at all. I think it's a pretty decent offseason for the Tigers. I think they got better than what they were. They lose Erod is pretty much the biggest guy they lose. And they go out in the games, gain not only a lot of rotational depth, but also Mark Hanna and trying to address some offense as well. Again, not that Mark Hanna is going to make this offense single-handed. I understand what Mark Hanna is. I'm just saying I think they're probably going to be on paper more talented than they were last year. So we'll see what happens. But I think, middle of the pack offseason. If you wanted to rank every single team's offseason, I think the Tigers are middle of the pack-ish. Fine winter. Okay, cool. I'll see you all Friday. Thanks for making us your first listen every day. Appreciate all the everydayers. we'll be back then. Peace and love. Going to therapy's dope. I'll catch you all then for the millionth time. Go Tigers, baby.